There are moments in life when you suddenly realize you are different from everyone else. While the world rushes forward like a hot, sweeping wind, you stand still, listening, observing, letting your mind wander into corners no one else ever notices. That is not loneliness. It is the mark of a very rare kind of mind, what psychology calls the psychology of people who are deep thinkers, the inner world of those who think deeply. They move through this world with a slower, quieter rhythm, not because they are fragile, but because they feel far more than what is required to survive a hurried life. In the crowd, they are silent, not because they lack something to say, but because they are weighing the layers of meaning hidden beneath every answer. Where the world sees a moment, they see a story. When others hear words, they hear the fear, the longing, and the unspoken truths that the speaker isn't brave enough to voice. And here lies the paradox of deep thinkers. They are not cold, they are simply protecting the softest part of themselves. They are not distant, they just refuse to give their heart to empty conversations. They are not overthinking, they simply perceive layers of meaning others do not notice. They are not slow, they only choose precision over instinctual reaction. To understand them, one must see in images rather than in words. They are like divers in the ocean of the mind. While the rest of the world swims across the surface of everyday stories, they dive to the depths where meanings, memories, emotions, and metaphors intertwine into a vast inner world. They may sit quietly in a cafe, eyes drifting toward an invisible void, yet inside them is a rising wave of thoughts they have not found the language to express. And if this feels familiar, perhaps you are one of them. Perhaps your whole life, you have wondered why you don't fit the world, only to realize that you were never wrong. You simply belong to a rare kind of people, those who were not born to move at the speed of life, but to see through it. Deep thinkers exist to remind us of something the modern world often forgets, that life is not only about speed, it is also about depth. To understand the psychology of deep thinkers is to understand the deepest, most delicate, and often forgotten part within each of us. Here's what most people don't realize. Deep thinkers are not complicating things the way many assume. They operate through a far more intricate structure of the brain, a system science is still trying to decode, while most of society has never truly understood it. In psychology, there is a concept called the default mode network, the neural network activated when the mind enters states of introspection, creativity, or memory retrieval. Most people only enter this state when they rest. But for deep thinkers, this system is active almost constantly, like a quiet machine weaving thoughts into a dense, interconnected web. This is why they often sink into deep reflection triggered by something incredibly small. A sentence, a glance, a vague detail. While others see an event as a single point, they see an entire chain of causes, effects, emotions, memories, intertwined around it. Psychologists call this trait introspection, the tendency to self-analyze. But for deep thinkers, it is not just a tendency. It is like a second form of breathing. It happens effortlessly, and it cannot be switched off. When information comes in, they don't absorb it in a straight line. Their mind breaks it into multiple layers: an emotional layer, a logical layer, a symbolic layer, a contextual layer, a layer of implications. Each layer leads them to another question. It is a sophisticated process, invisible on the outside, but inside, it feels like an ongoing wave in motion. And this creates a fascinating paradox. They respond slowly, not because they lack quickness, but because they are processing far more layers than others. When an average person hears a question and answers immediately, a deep thinker must walk through an entire inner journey. How do I interpret this question? What is hidden behind that tone? Which answer expresses my meaning most accurately? They are not hesitating, they are choosing their words responsibly. Psychology calls a part of this process metacognition, the ability to think about thinking. Most people use it only when necessary. Deep thinkers live inside it. They observe their own stream of thoughts like someone watching the rain through a window. Each drop that falls triggers another subtle movement. This gives them heightened self-awareness, but also makes them prone to self-doubt. For when you can see too many angles, you also see your flaws in piercing clarity, or as the original framework says, they see all their flaws in high definition. To make this easier to visualize, imagine their mind as a laboratory where the lights never go off. Every experience is placed on the examination table. They analyze its origins, its emotional weight, its long-term impact, the meaning behind it. A small conversation with someone can become an hours-long chain of internal analysis. This mental mechanism creates a hidden value the world often overlooks. They do not react in order to reply. They react in order to understand the true nature of what is happening. A small example. When you tell them, "I'm fine," they don't just hear the word fine. They hear the slight drop in your tone, the pause between your words, the quietness in your eyes. And from those tiny fragments, their mind constructs a fuller emotional picture of what you're really feeling. This is not overthinking. It is deep processing, the ability to process experiences with emotional and symbolic density. A pattern psychology describes as the tendency to attach layered meaning to everything. This is why deep thinkers often feel exhausted in places where others don't. Exhausted by sensing too clearly the emotional shades of those around them. Exhausted by recognizing what others try to hide. Exhausted by a mind that never stops analyzing. But it is also what makes them some of the rarest, most profound individuals in this world. There is one thing few people are willing to admit. Society is not truly designed for those who see life in depth. It spins on an axis of speed, convenience, quick decisions made in seconds, and emotions compressed small enough so they don't disrupt anything. Meanwhile, those who carry within them the psychology of people who are deep thinkers operate on a completely different orbit, one that prioritizes meaning over speed. In everyday life, this difference shows itself quietly. When the collective moves fast like a rushing current, a deep thinker stands at the riverbank, watching how each ripple appears and disappears. It's not that they stand apart, it's simply that the flow of that water does not match the rhythm of their heart. There are meetings where everyone makes a decision within a few exchanged sentences. The deep thinker stays silent, not because they lack an opinion, but because they are tracing the long chain behind that small decision, as if touching a single thread and seeing the entire fabric shift. While society equates fast with efficiency, they believe that right matters more. And this difference in rhythm makes them appear dreamy, slow, or even complicated. But in truth, they are simply living one beat apart. In daily social interactions, deep thinkers perceive the world not only through words, but through the atmosphere that surrounds the conversation. Others toss ideas back and forth like small pebbles. The deep thinker, meanwhile, holds each pebble gently, turning it in their hand to understand its shape, why it was thrown, and where it was picked up from. This meticulousness is not a burden. It is their way of finding authenticity in a world full of surfaces. In crowded environments, they often feel as if they are stepping into a marketplace where everyone is speaking loudly, but no one is truly listening. It's not that they lack the ability to blend in. They simply cannot find grounding in places where words outweigh feelings and speed outweighs presence. In such a world, they feel like someone walking slowly on a conveyor belt, running in the opposite direction, having to work hard not to lose balance, yet unable to force themselves to move faster than their natural pace. There is a fascinating social observation. Deep thinkers are often uncomfortable with rushed sharing, ready-made conclusions, or reassurances spoken merely to soothe. They neither agree nor disagree. They simply feel that such words do not touch the truest part of a person. For them, every story has an unsaid layer, but society does not want that layer. The world chooses comfort, they choose truth. Because of this, many deep thinkers have learned to shrink their presence so they won't create a sense of misalignment for those around them. They argue less, speak less, open up less. Not because they fear being wrong. They fear that what they carry, big feelings, deep thoughts, heavy questions, will become a burden to someone who is not ready to receive them. So they carry their understanding like a small stone in their pocket, always there, but rarely taken out. In close relationships, this difference becomes even more visible. Where others treat a moment as something passing, a deep thinker sees it as a doorway. An offhand comment can open an entire chain of questions about love, trust, vulnerability, or something deeper. It's not that they are overly sensitive. They were simply born with eyes that naturally look inward. But in a society that treats speed as normal, this ability is easily misunderstood as a weakness. In reality, many sociological studies show that people who think deeply perceive time differently from the rest. They possess a unique form of psychological time, slower, deeper, heavier. This doesn't make them outdated. It is simply another way of existing. One person may read a story in 5 minutes, another may take an hour. But who said the second person understands less? The root of this difference often begins in childhood. Children who think deeply rarely blend into groups quickly, not because they are shy, but because they love to observe the world as if it were a mystery to be decoded. As they grow up, they carry that curiosity into adulthood, and then they discover that the adult world no longer appreciates mysteries. It appreciates speed and convenience. This creates a quiet kind of disappointment that deep thinkers rarely name. But perhaps the most important point is this: they are not wrong. They are simply different. The world moves wide and flat. They move deep and narrow, two directions that do not cancel each other out, but rarely meet in the middle. And when deep thinkers finally understand this, a quiet kind of relief appears, a subtle form of freedom. So, I'm not broken. I just don't belong to the speed everyone worships. Understanding the psychology of people who are deep thinkers is not about fixing them. It is about seeing that every person carries their own rhythm. And deep thinkers, by existing through their depth, are reminders that life is not meant to be seen only through its surface. It is also meant to be seen through the small cracks where light enters, through the stillness the world is. There are battles that happen even when there is no enemy. Battles without bloodshed, without swords, without smoke or fire. They unfold in the dark, behind a pair of eyes that appear perfectly calm on the surface, and no one sees them. It is the battle between two halves of the mind, one half wanting to live lightly, and the other wanting to live truthfully. For the psychology of people who are deep thinkers, this is not a sudden eruption. It is a quiet tremor stretching over years, a faint vibration that never stops. Like the sound of a heartbeat underwater, no one else hears it, but the one carrying it feels every beat with clarity. The paradox lies here. They want to let go, yet they want to understand everything. They long to live innocently, yet they cannot stop dissecting the invisible. They crave peace, yet they fear that peace might be built on false ground. They don't know which part of themselves to trust. Both sides make sense, and because both make sense, they cannot choose. There are days when they just want to live like everyone else. Turn on music, sit down, and let life flow without analyzing a single extra layer. But then a tiny emotion flickers, a small intuition appears, a sudden question rises, and the peaceful flow of life transforms into a maze. They don't want this, but they cannot not enter it. For them, questions do not wait. If it must be named, this battle does not lie in the exhaustion of thinking. It lies in the fear that if they stop thinking, they will lose something real. A fragile truth, delicate as glass, that only reveals itself when one is patient enough to look into the depths. Others tell them to relax, but deep thinkers know this. Some truths cannot be found when you relax. They only appear when you dare to look long enough. They know the price of depth. Depth is never free. It always carries a little darkness with it, a clarity that makes their heart heavier than they wish. But they also know, if they don't walk into that darkness, they will never reach the light behind it. There is a psychological saying that many deep thinkers carry with them throughout life. Overthinking is worrying about the future. Deep thinking is questioning reality itself. A simple sentence, yet it becomes a defining line. For someone may worry about tomorrow and still sleep peacefully. But once a person touches the foundational questions of existence, what exactly am I living inside of? Peace is no longer a given. They must learn how to bring it back on their own. Those questions don't make deep thinkers sad. They simply push them into a dimension that people who live lightly rarely enter. A shapeless space where the familiar elements of life suddenly feel foreign. The things others take as obvious happiness, love, time, values, kindness always carry a hovering question for them. Why? And this question opens the second layer, the awareness of impermanence. Not impermanence as written in philosophical books, but impermanence felt as clearly as watching a candle flicker in the wind, seeing it glow while knowing it could go out at any moment. Life, in their eyes, is not a gentle river, but shifting masses of water, both beautiful and terrifying. They see the beauty in every moment, but also the loss that comes immediately after. This makes them love life with more caution than others, not because they are weak, but because they see the fragile architecture of the things they cherish. They know happiness doesn't stand still. They know people change. They know time takes everything. But they also know something the superficial never realize. It is precisely this fragility that makes life worth living. As they go deeper, a subtle shift begins. They realize that the greatest battle is not between wanting to understand and wanting peace. It is between wanting control and wanting trust. Deep thinkers rarely believe in randomness. They believe everything has a reason, but this belief makes them read signs that are not yet clear. Until one day, they learn. Not every reason needs to be understood. Some reasons are meant to live with us, not to be dissected. This is when philosophy becomes a companion, not an adversary. Instead of chasing truth, they begin to simply stand beside it, like standing beside a stream, no longer trying to hold the water in their hands, only listening to the sound of it flowing, because they finally understand what you cannot grasp does not cease to exist. At that point, philosophy is no longer an effort to explain life. It becomes a space to accept life. Human beings cannot see the entire structure of reality, but they can live in harmony with it. And for deep thinkers, that is a true form of liberation. When this happens, the silent inner war softens, not because they have won, and not because they have lost, but because they begin to see that some battles are created only to teach us how to stand still. And when they stand still long enough, they discover the very thing they spent a lifetime searching for. Not an answer, but a resting place. Not certainty, but wholeness. Not clarity, but the acceptance that they do not need clarity to live a meaningful life. That is the moment where depth touches peace. A small moment, yet the illuminating point of the entire journey of a deep thinker. Not because they have understood everything, but because they have understood enough not to be swallowed by their own thoughts anymore. There is a truth deep thinkers rarely dare to say out loud. Depth does not carry only light. It always comes with a quiet, patient, slow-moving shadow that rests just beneath the brightest part of their consciousness. And in the stillest hours, that shadow finally takes shape. It is not sadness. It is not despair. It is simply what happens when someone looks at the world too closely. Like staring into a mirror from a very short distance. You don't just see your face, you begin to see the tiny fractures behind the glass. Deep thinkers are the same. They look at things, and they also see the cracks behind those things. They look at people, and they notice the layers of silence no one acknowledges. They look at happiness, and unconsciously see the fragile trace of the day it will fade. This is where the shadow enters. They don't just feel, they feel the ending. Others can enjoy a beautiful moment and stop there. But for deep thinkers, that beautiful moment triggers an undercurrent inside them. It will change. It will shift. How long can I hold it? The question doesn't appear by intention. It is simply the price of seeing too far. And so they become people standing between two shores, the shore of joy and the shore of foreboding. A beautiful smile warms them, but simultaneously brings an unnamed worry. A sincere hug comforts them, but also carries the feeling that something so beautiful can't stay long. They are not pessimistic. They are simply too aware of the impermanence of everything. This is the first shadow, seeing too clearly what others choose not to see. Then there is the second shadow, lying deeper. They believe they must carry all of that on their own. No one knows how intense their sensitivity is, because outwardly they often appear calm, stable, unbothered. The world mistakes their silence for strength, but their silence is often the only way to keep others from bearing the weight of what they perceive too deeply. They choose to keep it, choose to swallow it, choose to decode it alone. But the human body is not designed to store too many layers of meaning, and so they become vessels with a smooth surface but cracks within. Their mind at that point is not a loud storm, but a black lake, so still that no one notices how deep it goes. But they know, they always know, and it is that knowing that exhausts them. This is when consequences begin to show. When someone perceives the world by depth instead of breadth, they easily lose track of when their exhaustion began. Their heart absorbs too many echoes from small things. A slightly wandering gaze, a careless tone, a subtle shift in the air, and they don't understand why their reaction feels so intense. They blame themselves. They think they are too much. They think they are overreacting. But the truth is simple. Depth always demands energy. The more you look into essence, the more you burn. And when they burn too much, the third shadow appears, an unconscious isolation, not because they want to distance themselves. They just don't want others to see them breaking in ways they cannot control. They retreat inward, retreat into their own thoughts, not quite running away, but entering a survival instinct. This is where philosophy enters. Very naturally, when we are tired of the outside world, we turn inward. But when we are tired of our own inner world, we begin asking questions that do not come with easy answers. Deep thinkers confront this sooner than others. Is the meaning I'm seeking hurting me more than it's enlightening me? Is there a limit to depth, or is it bottomless? The shadow that follows me, is it darkness, or just an unnamed part of me? When reflecting this far, they begin to see a subtle truth, painful, yet real. Depth does not always lead to illumination. Sometimes it only leads to exhaustion. But admitting this is the first step toward freedom. Not a grand freedom, but the soft exhale of someone realizing they don't have to be strong on every layer of their consciousness. Philosophy calls this moment a luminous breakpoint, when a person looks at their own darkness, not to run from it, but to recognize that it cannot destroy them. And that is where part 5 ends with a gentle truth. Deep thinkers are not as strong as people assume. They get tired. They are too sensitive. They understand so much that sometimes they have nowhere to put that understanding down. But this is also what makes them beautiful, for they carry something the world desperately lacks: the ability to look into darkness without losing the meaning of light. There is something strange about the very darkness deep thinkers are afraid to face. Within it lies a very soft light, waiting for them to step toward. It does not flare up like city lights, nor shine like the morning sun. It is like the glow of a candle placed in the corner of a room, small, quiet, slow, yet warm enough to fill the whole space if one is willing to stay with it. The turning point does not come from a dramatic event, nor a sudden lesson, nor a striking awakening. It comes from a very simple moment when a deep thinker realizes they do not need to defeat the darkness to live in peace. They only need to sit with it. When they stop analyzing another layer, stop trying to assemble every emotional fragment into a perfect shape, stop resisting ambiguity, the darkness ceases to be a threat. It becomes a space to breathe, to lean into, to release. There is a profoundly human philosophy within the psychology of people who are deep thinkers. Their quiet nature is not a burden, it is a form of intelligence. While the world speaks loudly to prove its existence, deep thinkers exist through silence that needs no display. That stillness is not weakness. It is how they listen to life with the full depth of their being. And when they recognize this, a soft relief spreads through their chest. So my silence is also a kind of knowing. The greatest shift happens when they understand that depth and peace are not opposing forces. They are simply two waves flowing within the same river. What hurt them before was believing they had to choose one and abandon the other. But depth cannot be abandoned, it is their essence. And peace cannot be forced, it is a state. Only when they stop choosing do the two merge, becoming a gentle form of wisdom. Wisdom that is neither loud nor sharp, but soft enough to embrace both the dark and the light within their life. To describe this transformation, perhaps a symbol is needed. Imagine a leaf falling onto the surface of a lake. The hurried person sees the fall. The deep thinker sees the reflection beneath the water. But the one who has entered healing sees neither. They see the stillness of the lake after the ripples fade. That is their new ability, to see the calm after the tremor, to see order after chaos, to see what remains after what has passed. Depth no longer weighs them down. It becomes new eyes with which to see life. When a deep thinker reaches this point, they begin to release a habit that once drained them dry. The habit of needing to understand everything. They realize some stories do not need conclusions. Some emotions only need to be touched lightly and then allowed to dissolve like smoke. Some relationships only need to be acknowledged as beautiful at one moment in time. And some questions are not meant to be answered. They exist to keep us humble before the vastness of life. This is where the most important message of healing appears. You don't need to change to become lighter. You only need to stop fighting against your own depth. Self-acceptance here is not a hollow slogan. It is the kind of acceptance that brings someone back to themselves. Acceptance that they see farther than others, feel more than others, and resonate at layers others don't even know exist. And that is completely okay. It does not make them misplaced. It makes them someone who sees what the world is slowly losing. The purity of silence. Silence to hear themselves. Silence to truly see others. Silence to wash the mind clean of noise. When a deep thinker reaches their own inner light, the heavy layers do not vanish instantly. They simply settle like sediment sinking when the lake is no longer disturbed. A gentle spaciousness begins to open. Not the lightness that comes from forgetting, but the lightness that comes from understanding. I no longer need to fight my own nature. As that lightness spreads, they feel as though stepping out of a dark cave into a sky wide open, quiet, blue, and spacious enough to hold even the questions without names. They realize that beneath all their thoughts, all their inner vibrations, all the depth that once exhausted them, there has always been a tender openness waiting for them to arrive. That space whispers to them softly, "You are not wrong, just breathe in your own rhythm." From that moment on, silence is no longer a burden. It becomes wisdom, the place where they hear the truest voice inside themselves, the place where confusion melts like old smoke, the place where they rediscover the wholeness the noisy world once took from them. And so, they no longer need to walk fast, nor walk far. They only need to walk in harmony with the depth that belongs to them. And if they choose, they may walk alongside those who understand that depth, those who do not force them to become shallow, do not demand constant clarity, do not fear their darkness, and do not extinguish their light. There is a very quiet conclusion that every deep thinker eventually approaches. Their inner world does not operate through sound, it operates through emptiness. If ordinary people understand life through words, reactions, and speed, deep thinkers understand life through the silence between two thoughts, the softness between two emotional pulses, the clarity between two layers of memory. For them, silence is not the absence of something. Silence is the original language of the mind. It is where all inner vibrations fall back into place. It is where tired thoughts are set down to breathe. The outside world looks at this silence and mistakes it for distance. But within the psychology of deep thinkers, silence is the way they understand, feel, and return everything to its essence. They use silence the way an artist uses shadow on a canvas. Not to hide, but to highlight what truly matters. If one had to choose a metaphor for the final destination of this journey, imagine the moment when the water returns to stillness after a small tremor. The hurried person sees only the stillness. The person with depth sees how that stillness was created. But the healed deep thinker sees something even deeper. That stillness is their truest nature. Because the mind of a deep thinker always moves like a lake. Every thought creates a ripple. Every emotion leaves a trace. Every memory carries weight. But what they seek is not found in the movement. What they seek is found in the moment the lake answers them with absolute calm. That is the answer they have been chasing all along. The answer of silence. When a deep thinker reaches this layer, healing no longer means thinking less or feeling less. Healing means syncing their breath with their own depth. Breath becomes a compass. When their mind wanders too far, breath calls them back. When sharp awareness begins to hurt, breath softens every edge. When they get lost in layers of memory, breath opens a gentle exit. For deep thinkers, breath is not merely biology. It is the natural balancing mechanism their mind has always used to recover. The deeper they go, the more they need breath. The more complex things become, the more they need space. And then they realize something crucial within their own psychology. Breath is the one thing depth cannot drown. It is like an invisible rope pulling them back to the surface whenever their thoughts get too heavy. One breath, just one, can open the way home. In the end, what deep thinkers learn is not how to think less, but how to let thoughts pass like clouds without grasping, without resisting. They begin to understand why the big questions of life never yield immediate answers. Not because they are complicated, but because one must be quiet enough to hear them. Quiet through breath, quiet through silence, quiet through returning to oneself. In that quiet, they see their essence glow like a small lamp in a vast room. It does not banish all darkness, but it keeps the darkness from swallowing them. That is the unique light of deep thinkers, the light of understanding without being consumed by it. And so, the journey of the psychology of people who are deep thinkers ends exactly where it should, in their breath. Not by conquering the mind, not by controlling thought, not by making themselves lighter, but by breathing in the way their mind needs, slow, deep, steady, and spacious enough to hold both the dark layers and the bright ones. For deep thinkers, silence is truth, emptiness is the map, and breath is the doorway back to themselves. And in the end, only one simple thing remains, almost like a whisper. Just breathe, and you will hear yourself.